Hey, and welcome to another video. Today I'm getting started on a new sword, and it's going to be a how-to video that was a request by someone on TikTok. And the request was for me to make a sword using only a grinder, a welder, and a torch. Now, he didn't specify what type of grinder, welder, and torch. So I'm going to be using a plasma torch, which I'm thinking he's saying a oxyacetylene torch. So a plasma cutter and a oxyacetylene, they'll accomplish pretty much the same thing. So where I'm using the plasma cutter, you can just substitute in a normal oxyacetylene torch to do your cutting. Unless you were to use a stainless steel, then you'll probably have to use a zip cut on your grinder. Either way, it's still accomplishable using the tools you are requesting. And the first step with making a sword is selecting your material. I have this piece of 2-inch wide by 1/4-inch thick Hardox 450 plate, and it'll make a nice sword. It's, I think, 5 feet long as it is, so I might need to trim it down a little bit, but it'll make a nice sword. And I'm going to be making it in the style of an executioner sword, and that is also by a request from someone on TikTok. So first thing I'm going to start with is tracing out what I want on this, and I'm just going to do that with a paint marker. So the blue paint marker I'll cut out here. That'll be the handle. Then it goes up to the full 2-inch width all the way to the end, on my one anyway, and here it'll be rounded with 3 holes. That's what I've seen with the executioner swords from doing a quick Google on them. I don't know a whole lot about those, but the main thing I want to do with this sword is probably split wood. So an executioner sword makes sense for that, and doesn't need a point. And yeah, so that's why I'm going with this design. And the other reason, I guess, is because they are more of an obscure one. They're not real mainstream, you know, and I'm a bit of a hipster that way, where I like stuff that's not as common and overused, like katanas and normal swords, right? And for someone who's just kind of practicing or starting out on making swords or knives or anything like that, I would recommend getting leaf springs because they are cheap, readily available, they're pretty easy to work with, and they'll hold an edge really well. And as far as torch cutting, you can actually cut them with an oxyacetylene torch, where a stainless steel you will not be able to. So yeah, that's probably your best bet. The one issue is most of the time they are curved, which you can straighten them out. You might need a bench vise that is very sturdily mounted, but you can straighten them, even though they are springy. So here's this end, and there's that end. And some of you might be wondering why I cut these holes with plasma instead of drilling, and that's because Hardox 450, it's like AR 450 plate, and AR 500 is what they use to make body armor plates. This stuff's just like a hair below that in hardness, which means it's still like bulletproof plate. It's very hard, and that means it's hard to drill. So I did this because I don't want to be sitting there riding on a drill trying to punch some holes through this. It's just the easiest way for me to do this. So that's what I did. And now onto the grinder. I'm assuming you're talking about an angle grinder, and I'm going to use this one that has a 3M abrasive fiber disc on it. And first thing I would do with the grinder is clean up my cuts. So I'll probably stand this up in a vise and grind that so it's nice and flat, and clean up my cuts so they're nice and symmetrical both sides. And over here, clean up this and clean up these, and I'll probably use a die grinder to clean up those holes, which I'm not sure if you have a die grinder, but I'm going to use one for cleaning up these holes a little bit. Now I'm going to start grinding the actual edge onto the sword. And one trick I've learned from someone else on YouTube is if you take a drill bit that's the same size as the thickness of the plate, you can run it along a table, and the tip of that will, that's hot, the tip will leave a scribe line right down the middle. It's hard to see, but one thing you could do is paint the edge, then run the drill bit. You'll leave that scribe line and you'll have perfectly centered line the whole length. So when you're grinding, that's your target to grind down to make your edge symmetrical on both sides. So now I got it clamped down, and I have these blue lines traced out for where I want to bevel it. The back side of the blade I'm not going to bevel to a point, the front side I will. And the main reason I'm doing this is because I'm only just going to be using this to split wood. So by leaving more material on the back, it will have more weight, which should help out with cutting wood. And it saves me a bit of time of making it a full edge on both sides. But this part is kind of up to you to decide what you want for your sword. And I actually switched to a 7-inch grinder to do this, and it doesn't change the function, obviously. It just makes it a little easier to take off more material, because this is a pretty big blade, so a lot of grinding goes into it. But one thing to note when you're doing this, it's good to go all the way across, back and forth. That way you're not focusing a lot of heat in one particular point, because with this sword I don't want to heat treat it after I'm done grinding. And I've had success with that in the past. It's just you got to take your time and grind it down, and if you start to see it change color at all, you know you're getting a little hot. So good to just spread out, grind the whole thing, and if it starts getting pretty hot, you could cool it down with water or something. As long as it's not like glowing or something, when you pour water on it, you're not going to like quench it to the point where it's brittle. If it's 100 degrees Celsius and you pour water on there, that's not going to really change the metallurgical effects, but it'll keep it cool while you're grinding, and that way you don't need to re-harden it if you're using something like Hardox where it's already hardened, or leaf springs, again, they're already hardened and tempered before you have them. So if you keep them cool, then they should stay nice and sharp when you're done. And as far as cutting it, like the plasma puts a little bit less heat into it than an oxyacetylene torch. So if you can avoid cutting the blade with the oxyacetylene, like if you use a leaf spring, use the factory edge as your blade edge, then that's one good way to avoid putting too much heat into the edge. Or if you do have to cut the blade, then maybe go with a zip cut on a grinder, because again, that'll put less heat into that edge, so it'll remain hard and you won't need to heat treat it after. So I'll just keep on grinding here and show you what it looks like once I'm done doing the grind. And now I'm getting to the point where it's coming to that edge, and here's where you have to be really careful. It's easy to overheat the blade since it's so thin right there. So here's where I'm at now, and that's as much as I'm doing with the 7-inch grinder there. From here, what I'm going to do is use the die grinder, which I'm not sure if that's one of the grinders you're talking about, but if you don't have a die grinder, There are flapper wheels like this for angle grinders that you could use. I prefer this one because I can run along the blade this way and keep it nice and straight, and also I'm going to use it to clean up the rest of the sword, and it puts kind of nice grinding lines. So now I got this end on the handle cleaned up with that die grinder as well. Makes it look nice, and the whole edge is cleaned up. But it's hard to tell here, but it does have a bit of a curve to it. I don't know if you'll be able to see that on video. With something like this, it's made of hard ox, so it's actually very springy. So what I'm gonna do, set it there and step on it. And you can see I bent it quite a bit, and it's still the other way. Put this down so you can see how much I'm actually flexing this thing. And still a little bit more. Let's go right down to the floor. So you can really tell how springy hard ox is here. You need to bend it that much just to get it to go straight. So that's basically it for the sword. Now on to the handle and cross guard or hand guard, whatever it's called. I'm not a big sword guy, so I don't know all the proper terminology. But I got this drawn up. I have a slot in here, and that's big enough that it'll fit right over the handle. Put it on, and then that's where I'm going to start using the welder. Which, to be honest, if you're making a sword, you're probably better off not doing any welding. I'm very confident in my welds, but if you're not a great welder, I wouldn't recommend welding anything. Because if you have a weld here and it's not a good weld, it could cause a crack, and if you crack the blade off of a handle, that's obviously not good. I'm pretty confident in my welds, so I'm not too worried about it. But yeah, if you could have a handguard built in to the plate where you can cut it out of one solid piece, like the handle, that is the best way to go. It's the strongest. You don't need to have any welds. That would be my recommendation. But again, I'm confident in my welds where I'm not too worried about it for me, but depends on your ability. So now I got this all cleaned up, same way I got sword cleaned up, and that just barely slides over that. And I'll put it up to here and weld it in place like that. But before I do that, I'm going to give it a twist. So I got it in a vise, and I'll try and make sure I remember to put it basically at the start of this radius when I do the other side, just to maintain consistency. And what I'm going to do is set a big crescent wrench to the right size, put it over there, and again, make sure I put this nice and square with it, and I'm putting it on the top edge of these radiuses, and I'll do that same spot when I do the other ones. And since this is mild steel, I should be able to do this. If I did this out of hard ox, I'd probably heat this up first, but I decided to go mild steel on this just to make everything easier for me, because I don't plan on getting into any sword fights with this, so the handguard is mostly for show. So here we go, give this a twist. I'll try and get it so it's 90 degrees. And right there looks pretty good. So it's pretty close to 90 degrees there. Now, again, I'm going to do the same thing. This guy right in there to the end of that radius. And I want to twist it the same way. Crescent wrench on there. At this end of these radiuses. And twist it around. And the jaws of the vise and the crescent wrench will leave a bit of a mar on there, so I'll have to do a little bit more cleanup. But I think that looks just lovely. And I actually decided to give it another full 180 because I think that looks better. Do it on the one side. Now we'll get the other side here, which this part's actually a lot harder. The first 90 degrees of this turn wasn't too bad, but here it gets to be a little difficult to do without any heat. But I think that extra twist looks pretty nice on there. So that's what it looks like on there. And now for the handle, I have a couple pieces of aluminum that I sheared. So I'm cheating a little bit, but you could cut these with a grinder with a zip cut on it. But I'm going to put those on there. And what I'll do is TIG weld both sides to make it a fully surrounding handle around this. And that's what I've done on my little hatchet, and also the piston sword as well. And I've done it on a couple chipping hammers that I've made too, and I just like how it looks. For you, if you don't have an aluminum welder, then I would recommend just drilling holes through this, putting pins through, and putting like a wooden handle. And there's tons of tutorials on how to do that on YouTube. So if can't do the aluminum handle way that I'm doing, then there's that option for you. I'm going to weld this up using my TIG welder I have at home, and I'll be welding it with some stainless steel filler wire. So now I got that welded on there. So now I have my two pieces of aluminum clamped on there. I radius this edge a little bit so it kind of matches this radius. Just for looks, have it up against the handguard. And I just need to push the bottom one forward a little bit. There's a little gap under there. But now I'll tack in a few spots, doing like a little bridge with TIG. In a few spots across there, then turn it sideways, clamp it in the vise, and weld across the whole thing. And here it is with the pattern welded on. This turned nice and blue here on the end, gives it some good contrast. And I think since that's super hot right now, and I want to give it a little rub down with some steel wool, what I'm going to do in the meantime while it's cooling down is take my palm sander and touch up just this top flat surface, which I know I'm cheating again using a tool that you didn't specify, but this one's just for looks. So now that this thing's cooled down a little bit, and you can see how it looks after the palm sander on there, makes it so the blade edge kind of stands out. I just did that because personal preference, I guess. But I'm going to take some steel wool here and rub the aluminum, and that'll clean up all those little white spots and give it all the kind of the same look. And that's about it for the fabrication process. Now one thing I do have to do is I'm going to clear coat it, that way this won't rust because it's not any kind of stainless, same as this and back here. And after clear coating, I'll go ahead and sharpen this edge with the diamond grit sharpening stone. And since everyone always asks, this one comes in at 8 pounds. It weighs 2/3 as much as the piston sword, but it's longer and has more weight out at the end. So this thing's gonna split wood awesome, I think. And while it's hanging there, I'll probably give it a clear coat. And here it is all clear coated, and to get a bit of a size reference, it's about as long as the cookie cutter, the peener wiener, and the piston short sword, or I guess connecting rod short sword. But for now I have this little 4-sided diamond grit block, and I'll use that to sharpen it up. If you don't have anything like this, then you'll be just left with the grinder sharpened edge, which is still sharp but not as sharp. And of course now it's time to test it out, see if it'll split a log, because that's what I made it for. Got a pretty decent sized piece of birch here. Core kind of just fell out of that one. Alright, I set up a new one. I'm gonna try and stand a bit further back because I notice I'm hitting sort of right in the middle of the blade. I want to be further out where I'm getting more velocity. It just seems like I'm standing super far away because it's a really long sword. That one went good. So yeah, that's how I make a sword using only grinder, plasma torch, and a welder. Let me know if you have any questions. I know I cheated in a few spots, but they're in ways that there's a workaround with the tools that are specified. So yeah, let me know if you got any questions, and thanks for watching.